Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon again, folks. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We're going to go back to that horrible world known as the JRC, but before we do, the usual disclaimers. We got a few things to shoot through because I got more pictures to take today. In the description box, you can find a link to the article that the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center doesn't want you to read. It's written by NeuroClastic, a small non-for-profit started by autistics for autistics, wherein they interviewed and surveyed over 900 ABA professionals in regards to the JRC's so-called behavior modification program. Matter of fact, the JRC doesn't want you to read this article so much. They've threatened NeuroClastic with a defamation lawsuit if they did not remove it from the website. Well, folks, NeuroClastic has refused, so you know the drill. Please read the article and share it on all your social media. Also included in there is NeuroClastic's public statement in regards to the defamation lawsuit threat, as well as a link to their GoFundMe. We are crowdfunding in case the JRC actually sees through with their threat. Also included in there, the Ozarks' first article in regards to Agape boarding school, now known as Stone for Help boarding school situation. A so-called Christian-themed boarding school based out of Stockton, Missouri that takes in so-called troubled male teens that has impending over 21 civil lawsuits, claims, and allegations leveled against it, all which have been substantiated by the Missouri Department of Social Services, and they include the following: sodomy, rape, sexual assault, child abuse, psychological and emotional abuse, child trafficking, starvation, and that's just for starters. You have one former staff member arrested by the FBI, another a doctor, still on the premises with full access to the boys, up on multiple, again, substantiated claims of sodomy, rape, and sexual assault of the boys there. You have an attorney general too busy chasing after and doing terrible bad Photoshop of drag queens and trying and failing to defund public libraries to actually do his job. And you've got our governor. God, I don't even think divine intervention can help our governor. Read that article. Share it on all your social media. We got the other pertinent links to the Stop the Shocks campaign, including Autistic Hoya's massive archive on the subject, Jennifer Masumba's behavioral sheet of shockable offenses, a clip out of the 7-hour ordeal undergone by Andre McCollins back in 2002, the templates, and the ever-present self-explanatory Change.org Shut the Judge Rotenberg Center Down petition. When we discuss the JRC, you're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips of surveillance footage of people with disabilities being tortured and abused. If you got young children present, folks, please go ahead and use the headphones, alright? Alright, we mark this channel not for kids for a reason. We use profanity on occasion and speak on dark subjects. If your child is 16 and younger and they're watching this, very obviously, parental supervision is advised. I know, I always say, I'm going to try to make it short and sweet, and it never is. I'm going to say it again, because I really do want to get out there and get some more pics, because after that, I'm just going to veg. I'm going to veg debating between either a Marvel or Marx Brothers marathon. Get my head out of social media for a while. Maybe play Donkapon. I don't know. We'll find out. Alright, folks. So, where we left off. People who would ban or severely limit the use of Aversives in educational or treatment settings, including other parents, professionals, and educators, as well as disability and youth rights self-advocates, point to the many instances of serious injury and death that such interventions have caused. Eyeballing the JRC real hard right now. 6, folks. 6 of them. 6. I get the reports all day from all over the world. Speaking of one of the reasons why I have to take social media breaks, of kids who are literally killed during botched restraints. Just botched restraints, folks. Now, as a person of logic and reason, I realize that there are occasions when a person is out of control, a danger to themselves and others, they need to be restrained. That's fair. What I need you to realize is the reasons why we are restrained is not always what it looks like on paper, including us exhibiting the exact same behaviors as our neurotypical peers, who, when they are restrained at all, are done so usually by one individual, as opposed to us who get 6 or 7 staff on us like we're 250-pound men on PCP. Okay? Many of these individuals in these schools who do the restraining are not individuals who are trained to do so. Want to know how people like my mom was able to restrain these individuals who were twice their size and body weight? Because they were trained in how to do so. Like, how can you do that and not end with a serious injury or death? Be trained to do so. Okay? There is no need to dogpile a 15-year-old kid. Okay? If you know what you're doing, there is no need for that to happen. Nor does it surprise me when such things do happen, and they do, all the time, all around the world, that deaths have occurred. Most frequently through means of asphyxiation. Alright? Conversations need to be had that have not been being had for decades on end. Okay? Young 15-year-old kids should not be dying accidental deaths because they were dogpiled by 6 staff for having a behavior that our neurotypical peers do that do not get dogpiled by 6 staff. Okay? Alright. Should go without saying here. Freaking seriously. Additionally, they assert that the use of force and coercion can cause significant psychological trauma. Remember, folks, what I said in the last video. That so-called tough love, it wasn't just the autistics that went through it. We only got basically double what everybody else got, but we all had to deal with it. We are a collection of a whole generation with trauma on top of our trauma. Okay? Made us more reckless. Made us more self-interest. Made us more likely to abuse ourselves later in a way to try to self-medicate. Suicides. Yeah. Coercion. These other forms of aversives. Not all they're cracked up to be. Not even on neurotypicals that you all absolutely insist we must become like, while at the same time holding us to higher standards that you hold neurotypicals up to. Fun thing nobody really tells you unless you're one of us. The level of intrusiveness and risk involved in their use under this philosophy is not justified, especially in response to mere noncompliance or minor disruptive behavior, as is often the case. Again, with aversives, there is no room for nuance. There's no room for context. Any type of behavior that is called noncompliance must be met with the same amount of force. One could be refusing to wear goggles. When you're dealing with dangerous behaviors, we treat that the same as someone who stands up for their desk for more than 3 seconds. Yeah. Aversive critics of their use would say are not even effective in addressing the target behaviors of any type, or are at best short-term solutions. Exactly. Coming from an entire generation that should be Exhibit A, using that type of aversive so-called therapy made an entire generation, the nihilist generation we're so famous for being. It made us more reckless, more out of control, more likely to cause ourselves grievous self-harm in the never-ending useless track of trying to one-up one another. Yeah. And then eventually the psychological trauma that came from that so-called tough love on top of the things that we did to ourselves as a way to boost ourselves up from it. And the aftermath of coming out of all the horrific self-medicating self-harm that we caused ourselves because of it. Okay? It will stop a behavior for a time, but only for a time. How many times have we said that? Eventually, it is in the human animal to respond with rebellion. Okay? And in that form of rebellion, we end up harming ourselves way more than we had before, so-called being corrected with proper behaviors. Okay? Take my generation as a lesson. Over the last few decades, the field of positive behavioral interventions and supports based on reinforcement and analyzing the cause of problematic behavior in order to effectively address it has advanced greatly. And should be common sense, by the way. Should be common sense. It should not be this whole thing based around how can we force you to be neurotypical? When in actuality, when you look at their models, they don't want us to be neurotypical. They want us to be better than neurotypicals. It's this romanticized idea they've created in their heads of what neurotypicals are as opposed to what they are really. You know what I mean? These are the reasons why my mom would get so frustrated with me when I spend my life in my head in a book. She wanted me to be introduced to reality, not just books. And this is case in point, because many of these people who build these ideas that we have to, us atypicals have to graft ourselves onto, are not based in reality. They're not based on what an actual neurotypical is really like. Okay? Just saying. When used properly, according to anti-aversive advocates, these techniques can prevent the perceived need for aversives, and even the emergency use of restraint and seclusion. It's because, if we follow the logic here, we determine what it is that's causing the triggering behaviors. And we can use interventions such as self-coping mechanisms, reasonable accommodations, when it calls for it, assistive devices. You neutralize it at the root. Or at the very least, you deal with it to the point that when these behaviors do pop up, because I live in this world called reality, and they are still going to pop up, you still bring it down to a minimum, and you bring it down to such a level that we're still able to operate in society. It solves the problem without violence. But I know, crazy talk. In contrast to the aforementioned right to effective treatment position, anti-aversive advocates argue that aversives, or at least some ways in which they are used, can constitute disability discrimination and even violations of human rights under domestic and international law. In fact, we cannot just say that's an opinion. It is actually true. And the only reason why it is allowed to continue, it has fallen under the protection of the so-called treatment clause. That's how they're being able to get away with it for all these years and years and years, decade after decade. Because they've all put it under the word treatment. And that's how they get away with it, folks. And nobody, if any real power, actually questions it. And you want to know why? Because they're kind of paid not to question it. We're going to close on that, folks. We don't get very many views on this channel. Few that we do tend to get removed from time to time, so please don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time, and as always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. I'm gonna go walk. Bye-bye, everyone.